Well, I took the streets of Wellington this afternoon and I asked this question. If you're going for a job interview, would you agree to being drug tested?
Absolutely not.
Probably say no.
Sure.
Not a problem,
To be honest, I probably wouldn't mind. Maybe, yeah.
because if you've got nothing to hide, it wouldn't be an issue.
If it's sort of like you've got the job and like we just need to drug test you first, then yeah.
Even if you are taking drugs, I don't think there's any reflection on the character, particularly if you're going for a job interview.
What about if you had a big night the night before and sort of had a few spliffs or...
Well, that's your own bad then. It's tough titty.
What about you?
Well, I don't think if you're doing that before going into a job interview, that's a really wise idea.
If you're handling the machinery, if it's job related, I'd definitely go for it.
What about like if you're in the job and the boss said we're going to introduce random drug testing?
That seems probably fair enough to me.
Really, I don't want to be in a situation where the powers of the business is able to extend to such a degree that they're able to do that to people.
Fair call, especially if you're going to be operating machinery or doing stuff that you need to be looking after other people.
Infringement on rights and their personal rights, perhaps.
Oh, geez, make me out to be the libertarian bastard. Tentatively, yes.
Yeah, bloody old Cuba Street. I love Cuba Street. This was a really thorny issue, and we had a big philosophical discussion, me and the cameraman. But would you agree to a drug test if John Key came along and said to you, Jono, you're from Palmerston North. Actually, no. Would you agree to a drug test?
I've got no issue with having a drug test. No, I've got no issue personally in giving a drug test. And I think what you've got to have is so long as you've got an agreement up front with people that actually this workplace requires you to...
It's an infringement on your right. You might have a few beers the night before, or you might be at a function or a party.
No, but there's a difference between a drug test and having a breathalyzer test or something like that. But actually, I don't think I should be turning up to work under the influence of alcohol either.
What do you think, Penny? Would you agree to having a drug test?
Yeah, I've got no problem with it, but I'd put the test back on management and senior management. I mean, if it applies to John Worker down here, then it should apply right throughout the whole company.
All right. What about you, Marama? Would you, or would that be infringement on your rights? So actually, if the boss said to you, or an employer, prospective employer, one final thing, Marama, we'd like you to undergo a drug test.
I think as a politician, New Zealanders have the right to know that we're not rocking up to the house completely out of it. But as an employer in a high-risk industry, in places where you have to operate machinery, if you're doing elderly care, aged care, child care, then I would expect that you should be able to put yourself up for a drug test.
What about white collar? Say for
it's good for one, it's good for all.
What about an accountant who's dealing, he or she is dealing with a lot of numbers and that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it should be dealt with, I think, as a health and safety issue, right? So if you're found to have an issue, this doesn't automatically, depending on your job, mean you'll get sacked. But if you continue to have an addiction that then starts to impact on your performance at work, no matter what your job is, if you're in charge of somebody else's money, I think they want to know that you're not taking risks with that money. Come on,
you might have a couple of splits of an evening, listen to
don't agree.
Some Chopin, I don't know. What about you, Kevin Haig? Would you agree to taking a drug test? Or do you agree with that guy in Cuba Street with the long hair says absolutely not?
Yeah. So what we say is health and safety in the workplace is a joint responsibility of employers and employees. And so if an employer has got some reason for suspecting that a worker's performance on the job is impaired, then absolutely, drug test. But we're opposed to random or universal drug testing when there's no reason to suppose that a worker is impaired.
No random drug testing. Hang on, John. I'll come back to you, John, but let's go to Damien Christie.
Yeah, I'm with Dr. Paul Fitzmaurice. He's a forensic toxicologist with the Drug Detection Agency. Hello.
Hello.
If someone's been in the Solomon Islands, would you be able to test to see whether they've tried, say, chewing betel nut in the last few days?
Not test for that, but I wouldn't recommend it. It contains carcinogens.
Okay, sweet. Good. We'll continue this conversation. So, I think everyone accepts that drug testing of dangerous jobs to some extent is the pilots, the forestry workers and that sort of stuff makes sense. But there's a growing number of jobs now that require drug testing of office workers. Do you think that's fair?
I think it's an employer's choice. I mean, obviously, during the recruitment process, they decide who they want to hire and who they don't want to hire. If there's a risk around the work that they're doing, they have responsibilities for money or logistics or something like that. There may be a risk to the business performance. So I think it's an employer's choice.
What else do the employees get to choose about for their staff, though? I mean, could they choose, people who don't go to certain churches or things like that? What's the difference?
Well, I think in the recruitment process or the employment process, you're choosing regarding experience, qualifications, and so, attitude and behaviour is probably part of that as well.
Okay. How widespread, I mean, how many out of you, as a percentage, how many of your tests these days would be for these more benign sort of positions, do you think?
Oh, white-collar testing, probably pre-employment's on the increase. So certainly at that stage, obviously, it's part of the recruitment vetting of the candidates. In the workplace, probably low percentages, but increasing. And if we look over the seas at the US, then certainly at the fore in the US with increasing white-collar testing.
And how much does it cost per test or per workplace?
For a standard urine test, you're probably looking at about $70 for the initial screen, and then maybe $100 for the laboratory confirmation if it goes on for further testing.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate
Very
it.
good, Damien. Hey, stay in the audience, Damien. I just want to jump to Jono and then back to the audience. But Jono, you had something to say on this.
Well, I think it's really important that we don't just make this as a one-size-fits-all, are you for drug testing, not against drug testing. I mean, if you're hopping on an aeroplane, you'd like to know that the airline pilots maybe are having random testing, right? Because otherwise you end up like having Denzel Washington and they flip the plane, all that sort of stuff in that movie. Then obviously you haven't seen it, that's okay. But so you want to know that people in certain positions are clean and aren't under the influence of drugs, and that's fine. And it's not just a yes or no answer for everybody.
Okay.
I think it's situational.
All right, that's fair enough. Let's jump to Damien Christie.
Yeah, we thought we'd get the opinion of Abby Wakefield. You may remember from the show. Were you on last week when I was?
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Future journalist, student, 16, is that right? 17, you've aged in the last week, or since they wrote my notes for me. You've got some things you want to say about this. What do you reckon?
Yeah, well, I used to work in a supermarket, and I had a colleague who came into work after using recreational drugs on the weekend, and they didn't really mind because they said that their job only involved providing good customer service, putting the groceries in the trolley, and not forgetting to scan the Flybuys card. But
how did they know the person? Did the person admit it?
They just told me. It came up in general conversation. Yeah. But in the long run, I do think it poses risks because it does seem to affect people's brains, and it will affect productivity and performance in the end.
What about though if someone's just got if there's such a thing as a mild drug habit that they do on the weekends that are under control? Do you think it's an infringement on people's privacy?
Well, if it poses a risk to the workplace, then no. But if they're performing at the rate they were performing before, then yes.
Cool. Thank you very much for your thoughts.
Right, very, very good. Mara, what about you? I mean, is it something? I mean, that guy there who said absolutely not, because it's part of. I was just thinking about this, and actually, it's more of a philosophical thing. How dare you actually decide to test me on something that I want to do the night before? I mean, it has no bearing on my work,
No, I think the thing is that, remember, it's a health and safety issue. It indicates that there is some sort of ongoing issue, I would think, and if it's affecting your performance at work, let that be the judge. If you are looking after people, looking after elderly, looking after young people, then whether or not you have it on the weekend or whether or not you're having it at work, it indicates that there is an issue ongoing
All right.
here.
Hey, before I go, Damien Christie, what was beaten nut like?
Oh, it tasted like crap, and we didn't really hold it in our mouths for long enough for it to do anything. But we wanted to at least try it anyway, because it seems so popular with the locals. But it tastes horrible. But I don't recommend it.
Don't recommend it at all. Stay with us. More next.